thanks for being here. If you have come for the webinar Quality Assurance and Ecological Seed Production, you're in the right place. My name is Steph Hughes, and I'm a Regional Coordinator in the Atlantic Provinces for the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security. I'll be facilitating today's webinar, which is the fourth and final in our series, Growing Good Seed, The Fundamentals. Some of you have participated in our past webinars. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, I'd like to take just a brief moment to talk about our program. The Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security is a Canada-wide program which was launched in 2013. Our 2-year anniversary is actually coming up next week, which is really exciting. As a program, we're dedicated to working on and off the field to expand the production and conservation of ecologically regionally adapted seed in Canada. The program was made possible thanks to the championship of Mrs. Gretchen Bauta, a member of the Weston Foundation. It's delivered nationally by USC Canada in partnership with Seeds of Diversity Canada and through the generous support of the W. Garfield Weston Foundation. Links to all of these groups can be found on our program homepage at seedsecurity.ca. We work in several program areas, including research and public access to seed, which means support for seed banks and seed libraries. And we aim to support farmers specifically in a number of ways, including support for regional seed conferences, local field days and training events, and seasonal internships in each region. This webinar series has been a key way for us to support growers, bringing seed savers together across the country and the continent to share knowledge and ideas. So over the past year, through this webinar series, we've covered topics such as seed crop planning, keeping your seed crops healthy, harvesting and cleaning your seed, and most recently we did one on on-farm plant breeding. Those webinars are all available as YouTube recordings on our website. We might be missing one, but that will be up soon. So we're currently in the process of designing our next webinar series for the 2015-2016 season. I want to welcome you to get in touch with me if you have feedback on how we can improve this webinar series, or if there are specific topics that you want us to address, you can let us know that as well. If you'd like to offer us some feedback, you can send comments to me. My email address is seed, S-E-E-D, @acornorganic.org. And I'll put that up at the end of today's webinar. So today we'll be hearing from two presenters, Bob Wildfawn of Seeds of Diversity Canada and Rupert Adams, who's joining us from Salt Spring Seeds and who's also engaged with the Bauta Family Initiative in BC. During the presentations, you're welcome to let us know if you have questions. As questions occur to you, you can just type them into the chat window, which is on the bottom right corner of your screen. I'll be monitoring that area and pulling questions from the pool to direct them to our speakers. We'll address short or clarifying questions after each presentation, and we'll hold larger discussion questions or items until the end of our webinar. We're preserving some time at the end for Q&A. So in addition to Rupert and Bob, we also have a special guest on the line. Dr. Dwayne Falk is with us today. And though Dwayne isn't formally presenting, he'll be on the line to offer his knowledge and expertise on the subject of quality assurance in a less formal capacity. I'll be calling on him for his thoughts after each presentation, and he'll also be available to answer your questions alongside Bob and Rupert at the end when question time comes. So for those of you who don't know Dwayne, I'll take a moment and introduce him now. Dwayne grew up in the cattle ranching and grain farming region of Montana. He emigrated to Canada in 1977 and became a Canadian citizen in 1982. Dwayne has a BSc in crop science and an MSc in agronomy from Montana State University. He also holds a PhD in cytogenetics breeding from the University of Guelph. Dwayne worked with the doubled haploid barley breeding program in New Zealand in the 1980s, and more recently has worked for the University of Guelph as a barley and oat breeder. Currently, Dwayne is retired, screening international oat germplasm for reaction to crown rust, as well as, we're really happy to say, developing potato germplasm for the organic farmer breeders as part of our national PPB program with the University of Manitoba. So welcome, Dwayne. We're really happy to have you here, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts a little later on. So Bob Wildfawn has been saving seeds and teaching about food biodiversity for over 20 years. From apples to zucchini, he mixes science and storytelling to reveal the secret lives of seeds, plants, and pollinators. As Executive Director of Seeds of Diversity Canada, Bob helps connect seed savers from coast to coast to rescue endangered Canadian seeds and food plants and to help develop markets for biodiverse food. So that's your presentation there, Bob. We'll advance it to the first slide for you, and you can go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thanks very much. It's great to see so many people on the list and so many names that I recognize too. The topic of seed quality assurance is very broad, and we could have many webinars just on seed quality assurance. But the part that I'm going to talk about here are the basics of seed storage and germination tests. So I'm going to talk about the seeds themselves after they're harvested, how to maintain their quality and how to maintain their viability in the long run. And Rupert will talk about a more broad assortment of topics. So if you have any questions that go beyond just these things that are on this slide here, the storage practices and germination tests, then chances are Rupert will talk about those, and you could save your questions till the end about that. You probably know that the best way to store seeds is to keep them dry, and if you keep them dry and you want to do even better, then keep them cold. And if you're keeping them dry and cold and you want to do even better, keep them in the dark. Those are the order of importance. Dry is really the most important thing. When we get to germination tests, we'll talk about the procedures of how to do a germination test, the kinds of records that you should keep, because you may want to look back on how that test was performed so that you can kind of read between the lines when your memory fails and understand really what happened during that test. So I'd like to start off by talking about what's in a seed. We often think that seeds are these inert things like pebbles that come alive somehow once they're planted. And actually, it's more like it's a living thing that is kind of asleep. You have a living plant inside every seed, and here we have this nice picture of a bean with a little sprout inside. And if you were to cut open a bean, soak it, cut it open, look inside, you'd see something kind of like this. It's really a little plant with two things that look like two halves of a peanut. And those two peanut halves are really bags of food. It's holding starch, and the little plant is alive, and it's eating its food. So as this good seed is living, though dormant, it's eating its food. So the reason that seeds lose their viability in the long run is that they've used up their food, and they die during storage simply when they run out of food. So keep this in mind because it's key to understanding good seed storage. The whole prospect of keeping seeds in storage is to make them eat their food slower so they last longer. Now you'll also find a different kind of inviable seed. That's a seed that never formed properly. So when you harvest your seeds, some of them will be alive and they have a proper living plant inside, and some of them simply didn't either pollinate properly or they didn't form properly, and it looks like a good seed, but there's not a living plant inside it. It's a dud. And this is a really important thing at the beginning. Right after harvest, you might have a bunch of seeds. They all look fine, but some of them aren't going to grow because they didn't form properly. And in this case, we have 5 seeds. One of them is a dud. That gives you 80% germination. If you planted these 5 seeds, you get 80% of them to grow. If you could only figure out how to get rid of that one, you'd raise your germination rate from 80% to 100%. And this is why seed cleaning is such a very important thing. You're trying to find those dud seeds and get rid of them somehow. There are 2 main ways to do this. All seed cleaning is based on 2 basic principles. You use a difference in density. That inviable seed, it weighs a little bit less than the others. So if you can get the air just right, you can blow it away. If it's the kind of seed that can float in water, tomato seeds are a classic example of this. The tomato seeds that float after the pulp is gone, those are often the inviable ones. So you can separate the good ones from the bad ones and improve your germination. This is a graph. It's a germination rate graph that it shows how seeds die off over time. And there are 2 lines on the graph. One goes down really fast. That's a seed that's being kept in a humid and warm condition. So what that fast drop-off means is that you start off with a certain germination rate in your seeds, and that rate decreases very quickly. So the seeds only last for maybe a year or two. The second line is where the seeds are being stored dry and cold. That means they're hibernating. Okay? You think about what is the few things you need to do to make a seed sprout. You give it water, you keep it warm, and you give it some light. So if you do the opposite, you keep it dry and cold and keep it in the dark, that's the opposite of germination, which is, you could call it hibernation or dormancy. And that means the seed will eat its food more slowly, which means the food lasts longer, which means the seed lasts longer. So dry and cold, that's the key, and that's the reason. Now you'll notice as a batch of seeds ages, you might have very good germination at the beginning. After a short time, you'll start to see the germination fall off. That's because a few seeds are starting to die out in the population. And what happens over time is that rate speeds up. Once you get down to about 80% or 70% germination, you'll find that it falls off very quickly after that. And notice over on the right-hand side here, I've put, this is my cheeky way of remembering which characteristics are most important. Dry is the most important. And Dwayne, our advisor here today, he just said it perfectly just before the webinar. If you can keep it dry, nothing else matters. That's what he said, and it's absolutely true. If you can't get all three of these, go for dry. If you can't get dry and cold together, get dry and warm, okay? Because dry is the most important of these three. Now, storage is hypothetical until you get one of these fellows over. There are lots of times that I've kept a bag of seed in a garden shed and kind of forgotten about it until in the springtime I went to clean out my shed and found an empty bag. Any container that you use in a place where there might be rodents around, make sure that it's a really good, well-sealed container that they can't chew through. They'll chew through plastic. They won't chew through metal or glass. The only trick about keeping seeds stored in sealed metal or glass containers, though, is make sure that the seeds are really well dried before you put them in. If you were to put seeds in a glass jar, let's say, that hadn't been properly dried out yet, even if they look dry, even if you kind of touch them and you think they're dry, the moisture in the seed will kind of come out and condense on the inside of the glass, especially when it gets cold. And then the next thing you know, you have mold growing in your seeds, and that's pretty bad. That kills the seeds. So well-dried seeds can go in a sealed container. I like glass jars. People use metal containers. There are lots of different sizes. But if you can't put them in a sealed container, like say you have just a very large amount and you have to put it in bags, my advice is to think of food. If you have an outbuilding and you want to store a bag of seeds in that building, think about whether you would put a bag of really delicious popcorn in that building. And if you think, knowing that building, that popcorn would just get shredded by mice, well, they're going to do the same thing to your seeds, because popcorn is seeds, and seeds are food. And you might not eat radish seeds on their own, but mice do. So just think of them as food. Don't put it any place where you wouldn't put food. This is a special kind of pest. These little holes in the beans are caused by an insect called a bean weevil. And I'm sort of ashamed to say this is my picture. I know bean weevils really well because I've got them. But you shouldn't feel bad about that because they're everywhere. And anybody who's been growing beans long enough will probably have seen this. The bean weevil lays its eggs on the seed, and then the larva is a very, very tiny larva that can penetrate the seed coat. And they live inside the bean, and then they kind of break their way out. They chew these circular holes. The problem is you can't see them. They're so tiny until they emerge that you won't know they're there until they're too late. So if you ever find that you have a bean weevil infestation in your beans, the solution is really just to make sure the seeds are really well dried, and then freeze them. Just for a couple of days. It isn't the length of time that they're frozen that matters as much as the speed. When you put something in a freezer, it freezes really fast, and that's a damaging kind of quick freezing. Bean weevils, obviously, they live out in the open. It's winter time now. There are bean weevils on my land right now. So how come they're not being killed by the cold? And the reason is that they froze slowly. Naturally, they freeze slowly outside, and they thaw out slowly, and they can survive that. But they can't survive a fast freeze and a fast thaw. So that's how you often get rid of insect problems in seeds. Now, these seeds obviously are not saleable, and you won't want to sell seeds that have bean weevils in them. That's really not a good thing for your customers. But this is a way of removing and preventing also an infestation of other kinds of insects too. So germination tests. You have your seeds and you want to know how many of them are any good. Like we said before, if you were to take this batch of seeds, 5 seeds, 1 is no good, you were to plant them all, 4/5 of them would grow. That's 80%. Simple math. The thing is, 1 seed can throw that off by 20%. If you're only growing or only testing 5 seeds, it doesn't really tell you very accurately the germination rate. You need to grow a lot more just because of statistics to be able to get a more accurate test. Here's 100, and 4 of them are no good. That gives you 96%. That's a much more accurate test because 1 bad seed doesn't throw the germination rate off. It will affect it by 1% instead of affecting it by 20%. Now, commercial germination tests often require 400 seeds, and they actually divide it up to do several different tests. I'll get later on to why that's done. If you do this yourself, it's quite easy to do. Germination tests are really just a matter of sprouting seeds. If you can make seeds grow, then you can do a germination test. All it is sprouting and counting. The math is pretty simple. You count the number of strong sprouts. So often, sometimes you get a seed that just kind of barely pokes a root out and doesn't go much farther. You usually don't count that one. You count the seeds that sprout strongly and divide that by the number of seeds you sowed, and times 100 gives you the percentage. A very typical method is to use 2 paper towels. You lay out a paper towel, count out an exact number of seeds. Say you're going to use 200 seeds in your test. Count out 200 seeds. Takes a bit of time. You lay them out more or less evenly on the paper towel that's been wetted. It shouldn't be dripping wet. It should be just enough that the paper towel holds that much moisture. And then you sandwich another paper towel on top of it, roll it up, and put it in a sealed container. Plastic bags work really well. Now you record how many seeds you put in there, and you record the date because you'll probably forget. But a week later, unroll it and remove the sprouts that are good and strong. The reason you remove them is that you're going to put this back again and give it another week. Okay, and the sprouts can sometimes rot and get uncomfortable. They also kind of interfere with the counting of the next time around. It's much easier, believe it or not, just to remove the sprouts that have sprouted, count them, roll the thing back up, and put it back in the bag for another week. So now you count how many sprouts came the first week, you count the number of sprouts a week later. That's the total number of seeds that have germinated divided by the number that you sowed, and that gives you the germination rate. Multiply by 100 to get it as a percentage. And a lot of times people ask, so what temperature should you test the seeds at? Because you can get much better germination often at a warm temperature than at a cold temperature. And it depends. Every species of seed is a little different. Some like to be warm, some like to be cool. But generally seeds sprout a little bit better when they're warmer. That can actually give you a bit of an inaccurate result Because if you favor the seeds in your germination test and give them the very best conditions possible, then it looks like, well, you can get a great germination rate. But you plant the very same seeds outside, and you might get a much lower germination rate. You know, you can decide how you want to work with this. If you intend, for example, to plant your seeds in a greenhouse where they have much the same conditions that you could give them in an ideal germination test anyway, then give them the best conditions in the test. But if you're going to plant the seeds out, or you have customers who are going to plant the seeds out in sort of a chilly early spring kind of condition in a garden where the soil might not be ideally moist, you know, you can unfairly inflate your germination rate by giving them ideal conditions better than what they're going to be planted in real life. So I normally like to think in terms of what the conditions will actually be when the seeds are planted. I always plant pepper seeds in a nice warm place because they like that, so it makes sense to do a germination test on pepper seeds in a warm place. Whereas lettuce often will germinate a little bit better when it's cooler, and that's the condition that people often plant their lettuce seed in early spring or mid-spring. So give them a similar condition for the germination test too. So now I mentioned before, when commercial germination tests are done, they often divide the seed sample up into a bunch of separate tests. The reason for that is to make sure that there's not something funny going on with any of the tests. If you were to plant 200 seeds out and only half of them grew, then you could say, well, half the seeds were bad. Or it might be that the soil was too wet and half of the seeds drowned. Or it might be the soil was too dry and the seeds didn't have proper conditions to grow. There are lots of reasons why the test might not work out. So if you were to divide instead into 4 separate tests and they all gave you the same result, then you'd know that it's much more likely that the test was done properly. If 3 of them give you the same result and one of them is really much higher or way lower, then you can say, well, that 4th test, something funny went on, that it was too wet or too dry, or it was, you know, too close to the heater, or something was different about it. It's this idea of replications and dividing the germination tests into separate tests and then averaging the result. That just gives you some assurance that the test was done properly and fairly. And finally, the information you would record. This is pretty intuitive. I think you want to record when you planted the seeds, when you made the notes, so that you can remember how long the test took. You have to adapt the germination test to the typical length of time that it takes for different crop seeds to grow. You know, pepper seeds, sometimes they just take more than 2 weeks to sprout. Eggplant seeds will often take much longer than that. So if you're testing eggplant seeds, don't give it just 2 weeks, maybe give it 3 weeks, maybe give it 4 weeks. It depends on the species. You'll want to be able to look back on to find out exactly which seed sample was tested. If you have a big collection of seeds, or you have a big inventory of seeds and you have several samples, it does make sense to have a separate germination test for each sample, especially if they're different ages or they have been stored differently. They might have different germination rates. But then you need to be able to connect your test result back to that sample somehow. You might use numbers, you might use some sort of code that you invent. It doesn't really matter, but be able to connect your results back to every particular seed sample. And then instead of just recording the percentage, it's useful to record how many seeds were involved in the test. So instead of just saying 90% of my seeds germinated, is that because you planted 10 seeds and 9 sprouted? Because that's not a very accurate test. Or is it that you planted 200 seeds and 180 sprouted? Well, that's a much more accurate test, but it gives you the same germination rate. Knowing the number of seeds that were involved in the test gives you a better idea of how accurate the result is. And also, if you can, note the temperature, because it may make a difference if you find that, say, pepper seeds are not germinating very well, and yet your test said that they were good. It might be nice to know how warm it was. Were you germinating them, or testing them rather, at a very high temperature? So that's the basics. And I see some questions coming through, and I just want to ask Steph if, should I address some questions now, or do we want to wait until the end?
I think we'll wait to the end, if that's okay with you, Bob, and then that way we
Sure.
can address questions to you and Rupert both, and hopefully it will make for a good discussion.
Okay, well, thanks very much.
This is Dwayne chiming in. If I could add just a few words of experience to some of Bob's comments. We find that insects generally cannot go through their full reproductive cycle. That is, some of the larval stages will not advance if the temperature is below 16 degrees Celsius. So it doesn't have to be cold. It just needs to be cool, and it will reduce insect activity dramatically. And at the university, for long-term seed storage, we always keep it between 8 and 10 degrees Celsius. So again, it's not frozen, but it's below the temperature that's critical for insect reproduction, and it also reduces the amount of mold and bacteria and fungi that grow on the seed. Another comment I'd like to make on germination, and this is a tremendous area of research and science, and there's a lot of art involved as well. Newspaper works just as well, and perhaps even better than paper towel, partly because it's a little bit stiffer and the seeds don't get waterlogged within the paper. So what we do is we lay out 4 or 5 layers of newspaper, dry. We soak the seeds for 24 hours just in a cup of water before putting them on the paper, and then they stick really well on dry paper. So it's easy to lay them out in some sort of order and make sure that they're not all piled up. We usually put them in a line diagonally across the paper. We then wet the paper gently and roll it up so that it forms sort of a tube, the seed kind of on the inside. We then put a rubber band on each end of that tube, put the tube vertically into a Ziploc bag, so one of the larger ones, and we can put 5 to 10 of these tubes in a single bag. We then set it vertical so that the tube is upright, and make sure that there's just a little bit of water in the bottom and that all of the tubes are thoroughly wet. Now the reason we put the water in the bottom is so that it can wick up into the tube where the seed is, but we don't want the seeds underwater because they need oxygen to germinate. And that's one of the problems of getting it too wet. So if you soak the seed ahead of time, then put it into the paper towel and restrict the water somewhat by just keeping it in the bottom, they tend to grow much better. They can get the oxygen that they need. They tend to grow fast enough that they don't get a lot of mold on them. And we find that works really well. It's a test that's been developed probably 50 or 60 years ago, and it was called the Ragdoll test. And this was before they even had Ziploc bags, but it works even better in a Ziploc bag. You can do it in a bucket of water and just put some plastic over the top of it as well. And then they're easy to get access to. They get plenty of oxygen and so on as well. Another thing, when you're recording data on germination, it's best to set up a spreadsheet so that you've got all of the parameters that you want to score across the top, and then you can enter the seed lot as each row. And a lot of people keep these going over several years, and they can see that some years you get better germination than other years and so on. And they compare what happened one year to the next with different seed lots, with different seed types and so on. And it's a really good way of learning more about what you're doing. So those were my few comments to add to what Bob very, very graphically demonstrated on seeds and germination.
Wonderful. Thank you both. There is one question that's come in that I think would be fairly quick which is from Rochelle, who asks, is air circulation necessary, or is it okay to seal the bag? Would either or both of you like to clarify that?
Sure. I think
I guess
Dwayne just mentioned that the seeds need oxygen, so too much water is often a problem. You don't want the seeds to be really, really wet or underwater because they need a bit of oxygen too.
absolutely. And so as long as there's a little bit of water in the bottom of a bag or the container, which can then wick up into the paper towel or the newspaper, it will get plenty of water. And if there isn't that excess of water, then it should get plenty of oxygen as well. But they definitely do need oxygen to grow.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I see questions from Alan and from Mel. I think we're going to shelve those for the time being and move on to Rupert's presentation, and then come back, and in the full Q&A we'll address some of those questions on germination tests and see what comes up in the meantime. So Rupert Adams is our next speaker. Rupert, booking agent and DJ, yoga teacher, and medicinal herb, food, and seed grower. He's worked for the past decade or so with Dan Jason and Salt Spring Seeds, he currently grows a wide variety of vegetable, grain, and herb seeds. He specializes in growing medicinal herbs, running his own medicinal herb and tincture business, which is called Kairos Botanicals. And over the past 2 years, Rupert has worked as the BC co-coordinator for and consultant to the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian seed security. So we're really pleased to have you here, Rupert. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And as soon as you can see your presentation there, feel free to go ahead and start.
Okay, I can see it. So before I start, a couple of things I wish to acknowledge: the First Nations of BC, especially the Coast Salish people on whose unceded territory I'm talking from, and also I'd like to acknowledge all seed growers and savers. It's such an important task. Especially in this day and age, the relevance of seed saving and seeds is becoming more and more understood, and the importance of it. And I'd also like to thank the Bauta Family Initiative for funding this series of webinars. So I'm going to continue on from where Bob was with the kind of basics of quality assurance, and then I'm going to get into ethics, because ethics is always, or seems to be always, associated with quality assurance. So just a point of interest, the barley there is bear barley, which is an awesome barley from northern Scotland. So to kind of, let's look at what, we use the term quality assurance, but what do we actually mean by that term? So quality is the degree of excellence of something. Assurance is a positive declaration intended to give confidence, a promise or a guarantee, a pledge. So like freedom from doubt, uncertainty about the quality of something that you're receiving or buying or exchanging. So that putting those two words together, we get the overall idea of what quality assurance is: the maintenance of a desired level of quality in a service or product, especially by means of attention to every stage of the process of delivery or production. Now, this is really, the last part of that definition there is really important in regards to ecological seed production, because a lot of what quality assurance deals with in general, or is the accepted norm for quality assurance, is what Bob just talked about, and then the next couple of things that I'm going to talk about, which are varietal purity characteristics and seedlot characteristics. So those are the three main categories, and then beyond that I'm going to go into the ethics side of things. So let's first deal with varietal purity characteristics, also known as genetic purity. So the first of those is the actual physical characteristics of the seed. So generally each variety, plant variety, has specific physical characteristics of the seed. So for example, length, the width, the overall shape and size of the seed, the color of the seed. Some seeds have specific aromas. So some of these physical characteristics can be measured. So for example, for length and width and overall size, you can physically measure them. For color, you can use what's called a colorimeter. So those are basically some of the physical characteristics that are being looked at in the varietal purity characteristics. So one thing that does come up is seed weight, which is a measurement. Basically, I'm going to advance the slides now. Hopefully they will advance. So seed weight either refers to one of two things, and if you're in seed world, you'll probably be familiar with both of these. So one is either the weight of 1,000 seeds or the amount of seeds per kilogram. So pretty straightforward what seed weight is. There are various other names for it as well. So let's go back to the next category of genetic purity, and we come to chemical characteristics. This is a little bit more advanced. So there are some chemical tests, especially in relation to grains. For example, the protein content, the amylase content of grains. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the tests that are involved, but just to make people aware that there are some chemical tests, chemical assays that can be used to determine characteristics of certain seed. And then we come to the third example here, or the third criteria, which is the crop characteristics. So there we're talking about, for example, the plant height. Generally, you'll see a uniform height of plants in certain varieties. That's not always the case. That's the ideal situation. Other crop characteristics, time to maturity, color of the plant, and growth habits as well, other than time to maturity. Most plant varieties have a definite structure of healthy growth, and sometimes you can identify in a plant something is amiss because the way that they're growing is not uniform to the rest of the other plants in the population. So those are the three main characteristics that are involved in genetic purity. So then we move on to the actual seed lot characteristics, the actual characteristics of the seed lot that you have. So there we're looking at, first of all, impurities that could be in your seed lot. Examples of that would be weed seeds, other crop seeds, chaff, inert matter such as twigs or stones or dirt. And there is a technique for coming up with the actual purity of your seed lot, which is called seed lot purity. So you weigh your seed sample, and then you remove, by whatever means necessary and available to you, the impurities, so the twigs, stones, other seeds, chaff, which is obviously a cleaning process. And then you weigh the sample with all those impurities removed, and then you take the weight of that pure seed, you divide it by your original sample weight, and times by 100, and that gives you the percentage purity of your seed lot, which is considered to be quite an important factor. So then let's go back to the second seed lot characteristic, which is seed size. Generally, the plumpness or fullness of a seed are good indicators that the seed has a good potential to produce vigorous seedlings, which is obviously extremely important. And this does kind of segue back to germination tests to some extent. But it's also a kind of visual analysis of your seed lot and sizes. One thing that does come up with seed size that seems to be a little bit of a contentious issue is eliminating large and small seeds to get a more standard or more uniform size of seed in your seed lot. We had some Cuban farmers over during the summer, and they were really concerned that large seeds and small seeds were being removed from some seed lots. The question that they had was that you're removing genetic diversity. So that's a little bit of an issue there. What I do generally, if I separate out large seed and small seed from a seed lot, I actually grow them out to see if there is any differentiation in the resulting plants from the different sizes of seed. And often I found there isn't, but in general, just from the point of quality assurance, quite often seed buyers are looking for uniform size in seed. So, and then we come to the third category here in seed lot characteristics. So, damaged, deformed, or infected seed. These I pretty much stand to reason here. So you want to have seed that is free from disease, from insects, and seed that has been carefully processed. There's always the chance when cleaning, harvesting and cleaning seed, especially when using mechanical means, there's always the danger that you can be damaging your seed. So always looking at the seed lot to see if you can observe any damage, and if there is damage, where's that damage coming from? Obviously, deformed seeds, which is going back to what Bob was talking about. And thirdly, the infected seed and disease, something that over time as a seed grower, you start to really become aware of disease and pest indicators in the field that can lead to problems later on when you harvest the seed, seed-borne disease. And, weevils were mentioned earlier. There are signs that you can spot your weevils early. So, and then that leads to just being aware and becoming more and more knowledgeable to recognize potential disease. It's something that I think that we've been talking about doing a future webinar on. So, because there are definite tests that can be used on seed for specific seed-borne disease. So hopefully we're going to actually tackle that in a little bit more depth in a future webinar. So we've dealt with the seed lot purity. We did seed weight. So after going through all those are basically the main three criteria. So what Bob covered, which is seed viability, which contains moisture content, germination, and seed vigor. And then the second category, varietal purity characteristics, which we've gone over. And then the third category, is seed lot characteristics. So those usually are the main three topics that are addressed when we look at quality assurance. So why do we need quality assurance? There must be a rationale here. So the main rationale, or the main rationales that come up are, first of all, ensuring that the best quality seed is getting to the farmers and growers who are growing our food and our future seeds. Something that's obviously really important. And then stands for itself here, preventing the spread of weeds, pests, and disease. If we're not doing that quality assurance on our seeds, and we're passing on weed seeds that could be what some people call invasive species, I call them opportunistic species. passing on pests and disease. It's just something we don't want to do because it can cause problems in the way that we're farming, causes imbalance in our ecosystem. And then thirdly, quality assurance kind of provides an even playing field for all seed growers. It just kind of stands to reason to have these guidelines that all seed growers can look up and adhere to move into a realm of selling quality seed. Buyers know that if they've adhered to a certain set of quality assurance guidelines, then they feel safe in buying that seed, going back to the definition of what quality assurance is. So the slides aren't numbered, which is a little bit of an issue. Let's move. So that's kind of dealing with the quality assurance. Now I'm going to go a little bit deeper here into quality assurance because there seem to be general aspects that we've already talked about or have already been mentioned that are not usually integrated into an overall seed quality assurance program. So going that little bit deeper and looking, especially with regards to ecological seed, what is that assurance with the product? And quite often that assurance is looking for something, an overall quality. As is mentioned in the definition of quality assurance, it's every aspect of the production. So in relation to ecological seed, we really need to be looking at every aspect of the production of that, I don't like to call them products, but of seeds. So let's look at some aspects that aren't necessarily covered in seed quality assurance, which a lot of people now who are getting involved in seed production feel that these aspects need to be included. So we look at the seed history. Where's the seed from? Where did your seed originally come from? Is it stock seed? Has it been grown purely? Is it seed stock? I mean, there are certain growers who particularly grow seed stock. Is it regionally adapted? What is the source of your seed? Is it a reliable source? And starting to bring ethics into this, where does your seed come from? Where was it grown? If it wasn't grown within your region, do you know where that seed came from? Under what conditions was it grown? Was it, it could have been grown in a country that's at war. We're starting to get into the more esoteric side of things here. But just knowing where your seed comes from is super, super important. Soil quality, obviously, certain things. We're talking about ecological seed, so we're looking at different ecological systems of growing seed, which, as I'm going to get to, is kind of the overall health of our ecosystem. So we need to know that our soil quality is good. Isolation distances, purity of seed, and coming into ethics here, being open and honest about, okay, was that enough of a distance away? And then we start looking at having to grow out seeds to make sure that our isolation distances are working. Roguing out of off-types, weeds, and disease plants as the crop matures, the seed crop matures. And again, coming to identifying possible seed-borne diseases. Again, I can't stress the importance of that. Harvesting techniques, cleaning techniques, drying techniques. These are all aspects that play into the overall quality assurance of your seed. And then this comes to one of the biggest avoidances, not avoidances, I think it's a time constraint, I know myself, is record keeping. It's a big part of quality assurance. It's a huge part. But as I said, I know from my own personal experience, sometimes in the peak of season, record keeping is not a top priority. So So we've been talking about ecologically grown. There's a little bit of a question mark over ecologically grown. So there's a rough definition here: grown within a farming system that works to maintain the overall health of the ecosystem. So we have here a definition that we've been working on at Bauta for what do we mean by ecologically grown, because it's a term that is being misused and is very open to being misused. So I just have this up there. I'm not going to read through that. You can check back on that because the webinar will be posted on the website. But that's, as I said, this is a working definition that we're trying to come up with for ecologically grown. So let's go back to, I mentioned farming systems that fall under this definition of ecologically grown. So obviously organic. Organic is an interesting, probably, before World War II, most agriculture would be considered to be organic, even though there are already kind of grumblings from farmers about scenarios with soil, loss in quality of soil, loss in quality of health of plants and livestock. So that was already starting to come into play at the beginning of the 20th century, which then spurred this, what came to be the biodynamic farming, which was a series of lectures that Rudolf Steiner gave in the mid-20s, and basically looking at farming as a complete system. So the overall health of your farming system is key to the food, the seeds that you're producing. So the health of the soil, the air, the water, the health of the people working the land, the health of all the different beings involved in the ecosystem. So we're moving into a little bit more of an esoteric side of farming and organic farming. Biodynamic farming is often given credit for the rise or for the basis of permaculture, which again looks at the overall health of the ecosystem working with nature. A lot of modern, what's called conventional agriculture, works against nature, which is kind of creates more work, which is kind of silly in a way. Why would you want to create more work for yourself when nature does a pretty good job? So trying to mimic nature. And then the term, a more recent term, agroecology, which is almost synonymous with organic, and some people say a term for all of the systems, a basic term encompassing all the systems I mentioned there. So, as I pointed out, most of the ecological farming systems that we're talking about, they use the term of ethics. And when you start to look and try and find a definition of ethics, there are many, many different definitions. So these are three examples of definitions of ethics. You'll notice that the word morals come up, so then we have to kind of look at what do morals mean. But so basically, the moral principles that govern a person or group's behavior, and the adherence to certain community or cultural standards that we adhere to. And it starts to get a little bit esoteric here. So then that includes morals. So a person's or group's standards of behavior or beliefs concerning what is not acceptable action. So what we've seen so far is that ecologically growing food and seeds, generally there is a strong code of ethics or a strong philosophy there. One of integrity, honesty, transparency, trust, respect, compassion, working with the ecosystem, working with nature. I took one example of a code of ethics from a seed organization. This is from the Oregon Seed Association. so that they talk about, not knowingly putting misnaming seeds, knowingly putting them in a bag of another variety. So, I mean, those are things that I'm sure none of us would do willingly. So, but I just put this up as an example of code of ethics. So kind of, as I said before, where we're coming from with this code of ethics, where we're coming from with this philosophy that is involved in growing ecological seeds. So, as I said, integrity, honesty, transparency, trust, respect, compassion, and that comes to this whole system of peer reviewing. As a seed grower, knowing the seed company you're selling to, as a seed buyer, knowing who your seed grower is, how they grow, and so on and so forth. So, and then this leads to an overall philosophy of ecological farming, and a lot of that philosophy can be taken from, or was originally taken, especially with biodynamics, was taken from indigenous cultures and Eastern philosophies, where there is a deep reverence, a deep acknowledgement of the importance of Mother Earth, of nature. We are part of nature, and to be removing ourselves from nature is unhealthy to begin with. We're part of that. So the understanding of a philosophy, of a code of ethics, which kind of leads to this quality assurance, basically working in farming with this holistic approach, which we've seen in organic farming, which we see in biodynamic farming, which we see in permaculture, which we're seeing in, as I said, the new term agroecology. So basically, just respecting and honoring the way that we work with nature. And as pointed out before, this overall health of the ecosystem. So whether that be the soil, the air, the water, the people that work in there, the insects, the plants, the animals, just this overall nurturing of the ecosystem, and working in that way produces quite incredible plants, food, and seeds. So I hope that didn't get kind of too involved there, but it's something that's come up a lot on my travels with Bauta, with people who are involved in seed growing, who are involved with food production, who are just becoming more familiar with it, is this whole idea of ethics and respecting nature. And somebody's forwarding and stopping and forwarding, but there's one last slide there that I can't actually get to now. But it's basically this one. So the seeds of life. Seeds are the basis of life, and they're very, very simple yet very complex, and they're very authentic. So I just would like to leave you with that image of, from sacred geometry, this is the basis of sacred geometry, this figure here, which is named the seed of life. And yeah, so any questions about the philosophies there? And thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Rupert. I get the feeling that there's a lot more to say on that topic. Perhaps before we go to general questions, and they have been rolling in slowly but surely, I'll go to Dwayne and see if you have some thoughts to offer, Dwayne.
Yeah, I just came back on live on the microphone. One of the best and simplest definitions I've ever run across as far as morality and ethics, that's what you do when you know that nobody's going to see you. In other words, you determine what's right and what's wrong. And nobody's going to see, nobody's ever going to know, but you. So whether you pick up that piece of paper or whether you just walk by it, that's up to you, and that's where your ethics come in. Another point on a number of the sort of topics that Rupert has touched on as far as seed purity and managing for quality and so on. The Canadian Seed Growers Association, which is set up by the primarily field crop growers, have a standard set of rules and regulations that they follow in order to produce certified seed, which are excellent guidelines for anybody producing not only field crops, but also vegetable crops or horticultural crops of any kind. And they've got a lot of very good information on their website, which is seedgrowers.ca. They have to follow those rules, but they are also very, very good guidelines. And what we're trying to encourage as much as possible within the organic movement is double certified seed, where it's grown on certified organic land under certified organic management, but also meets the Canadian Seed Growers pedigreed certification standards and therefore can be certified under their system as well. And they do have an excellent program to train people to grow seed of high quality. And as I say, their website is an excellent resource as well.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, all three of you. I hope people who are having trouble hearing have sorted themselves out. I heard a few people join the line on the phone, which is great, and we had a little bit of background noise, but that seems to have sorted it out, so thanks so much for muting your phone lines. We have a few questions, and we've got some time to address them, which is really great. So we'll start, I guess we'll start at the top while people kind of digest some of the information in Rupert's presentation. Feel free to add your questions to the mix as they occur to you. We'll go back and talk a little bit more about germination testing in the meantime. We have a question from Mel Sylvester that came in for you, Bob. She says, could you address a little more about the length of germination? In a germ test, would the seeds germinating 1 to 2 weeks after the first one be counted? Most farmers want germination within a short window for similar harvest time. Can you comment on that?
Right. You do have to accommodate the age of the seeds sometimes too, and it depends on the species. An old batch of seeds can have some seeds that have, for whatever reason, enough vigor left that they'll germinate within a week, but then others will take a longer time. Whereas a very fresh sample, they might all germinate within the same 5 days. So it depends very much on the expectations of the user of those seeds. If the person who plants them is expecting them all to germinate within 5 days, then germinating quickly. Whereas if you know that it's an old sample and your purpose is just to say, well, how many of these can I possibly manage to sprout again so that I can regrow my sample of very old seeds, then you just want every single seed that you can get, and it doesn't matter if some of them take 4 weeks to germinate. You'll be glad when they do. So that's an opposite extreme of an expectation. I think, Mel, you're right that most people who plant seeds are expecting results right away, because that's just the majority of growers. So that's probably the default position for most people is whichever seeds germinate in the first week, maybe 2. If you want to match the germination rate that you tell people with their expectations, then that's probably what they will expect. But like I said, it depends on the purpose that you're using the test for and what you're using the seeds for.
This is Dwayne.
I gave an example of using 2 weeks for a germination test, but also some species might take a very long time to germinate normally. So certain perennial flowers and certain wildflowers, for example, and some perennial herbs, 2 weeks is not nearly enough time for those to germinate at all, and you have to adapt your test to accommodate whatever the species would normally take.
This is Dwayne here. I'd just like to add another comment. Sometimes really fresh seed still has some dormancy in it because most wild plants have a built-in dormancy as an assurance that their progeny won't all be killed in a single year if there's some sort of a disaster. And some of our modern varieties and crops retain some of that dormancy. So if the seed is very fresh or if it was harvested from plants that didn't get fully mature, sometimes there's a delay in germination. Most of that can be reduced by drying the seed thoroughly. Again, very dry seed is a very good thing to do. So sometimes drying the seed or chilling it or stratifying it a little bit for a week or two will help give more uniform germination. But usually it's not a problem. Once it gets into the soil, things seem to come around much better sometimes than they do even in germination tests.
Great, and because you touched on this a little bit, Bob, I'll jump to one of the most recent questions from Superior seed producers, which is, do you have any suggestions for how to do germ tests on longer to germinate seeds like wildflowers? Do you have any tips you could share?
That's really not my experience. I haven't worked with wildflowers too much. I do know that some of them need a period of stratification, which means that they need either time sometimes to break their dormancy, or they need a change in temperature. A lot of native wildflowers need to be chilled or actually frozen for quite a long time. And that just makes it very difficult to test germination of a random sample of seeds, because if they've been cold stratified for a different length of time, or they've just been treated in any way differently, their germination rate will be more affected by that sometimes than by their age. And then going further, you can drastically change the germination rate by treating the seeds to some cold. And so then the old germination test means a lot less. But like I said, that's not really my area of experience anyway.
I would say with a lot of, in relation to wildflowers, as Bob kind of pointed out, was that most wildflowers will naturally, in a natural setting, will go through, the seeds will fall to the ground and go through a winter, so they need that period of cold to be able to get good germination rates.
Great. Thank you. Lots of questions here relating to the germination side of things. Our next question is from Alan. He said some seeds take 14 to 21 days to germinate, and sometimes in the paper towels they will rot before they actually germinate. Do you, Bob, have any experience with this?
Yeah, I have quite a bit of experience with seeds that have rotted in the paper towels. There's not much that smells that bad. I think Dwayne's idea of using vertical rolled up sort of newsprint style paper is probably a very good alternative, because it allows air to get to the seeds and without causing them to dry out too much. You need this happy balance of not allowing the paper to dry out, but still not be too wet. And I haven't tried the process that Dwayne described, but it sounds like it would avoid that problem of the seeds rotting.
Yeah, that happy balance is really important, because they need to stay damp, not necessarily soaking wet, but damp, but they also need access to oxygen in order for the metabolism to take place that results in germination.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to keep up with the questions here, which are coming in pretty quickly. So a few questions have come in related to storage challenges, including temperature and insects. So we'll go to a couple from Joel and Rochelle. The first is, how important is avoiding temperature extremes during storage? Do fast temperature changes make a major difference during seed storage? And then the second is, would you recommend a desiccant in the storage container?
Okay. It's Bob here. I would say, yes, changes in temperature will affect the germination, but that effect will be minimized if the seeds are very, very dry. And maybe Dwayne knows a lot more about this, and maybe he could chime in, but keeping the seeds really dry makes them resilient to an awful lot of stress. Is that right, Dwayne?
Yes, I agree fully. One of the problems with temperature change in storage is that you get condensation of moisture, either on the surface of the seed or on the container if it's not thoroughly dry. And then the seeds can start to imbibe. They may try to grow even with inadequate moisture. So keeping them dry will make them much more tolerant of quite a wide range in temperature changes. It's best to keep it constant. A good seed is kind of like a good wine. You want to take very good care of it. And constant temperature is important, but nowhere near as important as keeping it dry. I think Bob was absolutely right that dry is about 80% of the issue. Temperatures maybe another 10 to 15%, and dark is maybe 5%. But dry is the most critical factor regardless. Now, some seeds will store for a very long time if they're dry. We had some seed of barley and wheat stored at the university for 50 years at room temperature, but dry, just in paper bags, and it was giving 50 to 75% germination. Whereas oil seeds, canola, soybeans, and maybe some of the protein seeds like beans, they will not store as long regardless of how well you store them. So grain under ideal conditions will store 50 to 100 years. Soybeans under ideal conditions you might get 10 years out of. So some seeds, especially those that are high in oil or high in protein, tend to deteriorate much faster than those that are primarily carbohydrate. So just you can't have the same expectation for everything, but the critical factor in all of it is get it dry, keep it cool if you can, and keep it away from the bugs.
And sorry, Steph, there was a second question in there which I forgot.
The second question was, would you recommend putting some kind of desiccant in the storage container?
Oh, I see. Normally, desiccant is used during the drying stage, or during the drying phase of harvest. So, if you use a desiccant, and what people normally use is either silica gel or a clay product that's called bentonite, which is more favored for organic growers. Its purpose is to draw moisture out of the air so that then the air is very dry and draws moisture out of the seeds. So you put, in various ways, you can put the seeds and the desiccant in the same container, and it will basically dehydrate the seeds and finish them off in a way that open air or ambient air can't. It's just to get a little bit more dryness in, but then I'm not aware that most people leave the desiccant with the seeds, and I've heard that sometimes that can over dry them too. Once the seeds have been dried, I think the standard practice is that you take the desiccant out, the silica gel or the bentonite, and by heating it up, you can remove the water from the silica gel, and then you can use it again. So it probably costs more per pound than the seeds do, so you're probably better off to reuse it.
Mm-hmm. On that note, someone has asked the question about the susceptibility of over-drying onion seeds in particular, which can hurt their germination. Do you know, in your experience, are onion seeds a bit more touchy or sensitive, and would you have any tips for helping people avoid that?
Me, I'm not the one to ask about that. I'd say anybody else, Rupert or Dwayne, worked with onion seeds much?
Not really, but just I think in general you can actually dry down seeds as far as I know, too much. Either that you'll kill them, or that you send them into a deep stage of dormancy, and they're quite difficult to awaken and germinate. I'm not sure if Dwayne's familiar with that phenomena.
Well, a little bit, since I have grown onions and tried to keep seed of them. Most of the problem comes in, I think, if you're using too much heat while drying them. If you're just using ambient air, room temperature air, and using a fan or moving air, I don't think you can dry them too much. When you start adding heat, then you can take them down below that natural equilibrium that they would normally establish. So again, heat may be the culprit rather than just moving air. A note on the bentonite. Clumping kitty litter is almost 100% bentonite. And if you take that clumping kitty litter and put a tablespoon or so in the bottom of a jar with seed packets, it does a very good job of keeping the moisture out of the seed. And it's cheap. And it also can be reused again if you really want to.
Oh, wow. That's neat.
But it's the clumping kitty litter. That's the specific one. And I think if you check, most of them are labeled, and it's almost 100% bentonite.
Huh. Okay. Very cool. We have a question from Michelle in Nova Scotia regarding your presentation, Rupert. She says that you mentioned that some people have concerns about losing genetics if you're too picky winnowing small or suboptimal seeds. She's wondering about whether a larger grow-out population, something that's well above the minimum recommended grow-out population, would affect how big a risk this is. So I'll throw this out to both you, Rupert, and Dwayne.
Yeah, I think if it's a large population, then hopefully the majority of you, if you've grown out your seed crop well, then there's definitely going to be a relatively uniform size. So it was just a question that came up with when these Cuban farmers came over, because they were quite offended by the fact that we weren't just keeping all the seeds for. So it was just a comment that came up. But Dwayne may have more insight into that.
Well, I know when we are growing out large populations, we try to rogue out any plants that are defective, infected with disease, damaged, whatever, so that we have the best possible plants that are then harvested. And we do clean the seed fairly thoroughly and try to keep the best quality seed. And sometimes we sieve off the largest seed because sometimes they are kind of different. We keep the bulk of it, which is a nice average size, and we do separate out the smaller seed. We only distribute that best quality seed. Sometimes if we have a high demand for seed, or if we run out, or if we have seed a couple of years from now that we need to grow out, we may grow out that smaller seed, but we keep it separate from the time it's separated out until we grow it. When we grow it, we'll keep that smaller seed separate, try to grow it right next to a strip of the good quality seed. And if we see differences, we will then harvest them separately and may discard what came from the small seed if there is a problem. If it looks fine, if it just happened to be the smaller seed on a particular head or a smaller tiller or something, and the plants produced from that seed look the same as the others, then we may go ahead and harvest it and use it for seed as well. But if there's any doubt, keep it separate, grow it out, and then make the decision with what you see in the field. And as far as commercializing seed, most of the larger organizations will only sell the best quality seed. If there's any doubt whatsoever, they may hold it back themselves and grow it out in-house, but they won't sell it to customers. There is a possibility that it is inferior, that it may have a seed-borne disease, particularly a virus or something that would affect the crop itself.
Okay, that's really helpful information. Thank you. We have a whole bunch of kind of questions on insects and dryness and stuff like that. I'm aware that our time is a little bit limited, and I do want to take advantage of Rupert's presence on the line as well. And so I was wondering, before we get to some of the shorter questions, Rupert, if you wouldn't mind speaking to a little bit, so the role of honesty is what stuck out to me the most in your presentation. And I'm wondering if you would have a comment based on your experience with Salt Spring Seeds for some people who might be new to commercial growing about how you deal with integrity in the seed business for newer startup companies who may be struggling with some of the things around not having as much information as they'd like about seeds and that sort of thing. I wonder if you could quickly give us your thoughts on that.
In relation to the kind of honesty topic, Salt Spring Seeds, we have all our growers are friends of ours, per se. You know, we have a really good relationship. We know most of our growers pretty well, and I try and visit their farms or their homesteads at least once a year, and so it's having a relation. You know, this is something that's people becoming more and more aware of. You know, like know your farmer and so on. We know all our seed growers, and developing a relationship with them, like any relationship really, the more you develop a relationship, the more honest and open that relationship becomes. So I mentioned one thing about isolation distances, which is always a little bit of a contentious issue. Firstly, in the distances that are sometimes thrown around, like they vary greatly from one organization to another. But I think just the honesty there of going, well, yeah, we had that distance. Maybe it was a little bit less. So that's one example there of honesty, not only between the seed grower and the seed buyer, but also the self-honesty scenario. So developing a relationship with a seed company or an organization that is distributing or dealing in seeds is paramount to growing ecological seed, because there has been a little bit of a tendency over the last few years, specifically from our point of view at Salt Spring Seeds, where we've had quite a few growers drop their organic certification, which to us nothing changed really. The fact that those seeds were no longer certified per se, but from our perspective, the farmer was still using the same techniques. So that's another reason for getting to know your seed company, or vice versa, your seed grower, and developing that relationship over time is key, I think. If that answers your query.
Yeah. Well, and I'll give Dwayne and Bob the opportunity to comment on that as well, if you guys want to.
I guess I'd just like to add another comment concerning the Canadian Seed Growers Association. They maintain their quality assurance by independent third-party inspections. There's actually a person, generally from, now it's a separate organization, who comes around and inspects the crop in the field. They make sure that it's uniform, that it's relatively weed-free, that there are not off-types, and they look at isolation distances. They also want to know the field history, how many years since a similar crop was grown there. And then after harvest, a sample has to go to a recognized seed lab. The germination and the purity are tested to ensure that it meets the Canadian seed grower standard. So they impose this independent assessment on all of their seed growers. And that's where organic certification comes in as well. It's somebody from the outside who has no vested interest in your operation, who looks at it from a very objective point of view and says, yes, you meet this criteria, and this criteria. We can now certify and therefore validate that you are doing everything appropriately. And it's really important. Now, the inspectors rely a lot on the integrity of the person in answering questions and looking into the background and so on. But quality assurance is a really difficult area. It's, as they say, your reputation may take you 20 years to gain and 5 seconds to lose.
Yeah, that's right. I think in Canada right now, with especially in vegetable seed production, because there's so much fragmentation of the market, there is a real tension right now between a desire for some kind of third-party quality assurance and also a desire for freedom from regulation. And you know, we want the seed that our seed producers make to be trusted, or else people will keep on buying seed from other countries. But on the other hand, I'm very sympathetic to seed producers who don't want some third party watching over their shoulder while they are making, you know, their living. It is a point of tension right now, and I think it's a very interesting time.
Yeah.
Dwayne here again. Maybe I can take just a minute to address the question of hot water treatment. It's something that used to be used. Okay, it used to be used routinely with cereals because there are several seed-borne fungi, the smuts, in fact, that were controlled by hot water treatment. It was tricky. You had to you had to have a large volume of water. You had to heat it to a certain temperature, put the seed into it, maintain the temperature for a very specific length of time, then drain it out and dry the seed as thoroughly as possible. It went out of favor when systemic seed treatments came in. The VitaFlows, the VitaVacs, they did the same job as the hot water treatment. So most of my time in the cereal and seed business has been using systemic fungicides because they were so much better than the hot water treatment. My understanding is that even under the best of conditions, germination definitely was affected. It's very difficult to get enough water in the seed to heat up that embryo where the fungus is and then get it out again without stimulating germination. And once the seed starts to germinate, it's really hard to go back to full dormancy and have the energy that it did have. So the hot water treatment was phased out as quickly as possible when they had alternatives. Now, I mentioned a hot air earlier on, kind of offline. I was talking about a hot air treatment where the germination is much less affected, and what was done, and this was done by Ag Canada with their seed multiplication unit in Indian Head, Saskatchewan. They started out at about 20 degrees Celsius air, and they used a high volume of air over the seed lot, and then slowly ramped the temperature up as the moisture went down. Once they got the moisture down to, and this was almost specific for cereals. It should work for other things, but I won't guarantee it. They got the moisture down to about 10%. They then ramped the air up to 40 to 50 degrees Celsius. And as the moisture continued down, they kept elevating the air temperature until they got it up to 70 to 80 degrees Celsius. And they then held that for 24 to 48 hours, I believe, and then slowly brought the temperature down again. That desiccated the fungi in the seed and on the seed surface. They were particularly looking at Fusarium, but they found out that it also controlled a number of other diseases on the seed. So the seed was almost sterile when they finished this operation. And it reduced any dormancy in the seed. The germination was actually better after the hot air treatment than it was before. Plus, the seed was virtually free of all surface-borne and seed-borne diseases. Hot water scares me because it does stimulate germination. So This hot air treatment seemed to be so much better. And I'm looking into trying to develop a small-scale version of it that can be used either on farm or in a seed company or whatever to treat individual seed lots and try to get them as free of fungi, bacteria, virus as possible.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that was definitely worth taking the last couple of minutes of our Q&A to address.
Can I just, there's a
Yeah, of
question
course, Rupert. Go for
from Jeremy asking what are the best resources to learn about seed-borne disease? A great text on, it's called Diseases and Pests of Vegetable Crops in Canada, and I believe it's actually now online, downloadable. It's been out of print for quite some time and is extremely expensive to get hold of secondhand, but I believe it is on, it now is available for download online. I could send you the link to that, Steph, and we could put it up somewhere. It's published by the Entomological Society of Canada. It's an excellent book on different diseases and pests.
Yeah,
and
that's a great idea, Rupert.
And then he asked about places to send for testing. I personally am not totally familiar with labs where testing can be done. I know I've heard it is expensive. It seems to be a gap that we have that could be filled by some entrepreneur of a lot of needs for lab work around farming that are not necessarily catered to. I don't know what other people's experiences with testing, and Dwayne probably has experience of labs.
Yes, I actually went online to try to find if there was a list of certified seed testing labs, and I can't find it. I know that we use a couple here in Ontario that are sort of certified by the Canadian Seed Growers Association. The Canadian Seed Growers may have a list of those labs. I can check it out and see if we can post something on this website as well. It's probably very much worthwhile.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
If you two send those links to me, then I can send them out to everyone who registered for the webinar very easily. If that would be one way of doing it. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap it up here. It's 5:30 Eastern, and so I want to be respectful of people's time. I want to thank all three of you, Bob, Rupert, and Dwayne, for taking the time to share your knowledge and expertise with us. Your presentations, and I think also the quality of this Q&A has been really great, so thank you so much. Those of you who joined us from around the country, thanks for being here. If you have feedback on these webinars or if you have future topics that you'd like us to address, feel free to email me. Thanks, everyone, for being here, and I hope we get to do this again soon.
Okay, take care, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks.